Welcome in, everybody. My name is Chris Katulka, host of the Jew and Gentile podcast, and with me is none other than our co-host, the Jewish sage himself, Mr. Steve Herzig. How are you, Steve?
I'm doing great, Chris. How are you?
I'm doing good. It's great to be with you. I'm glad we're back for another week of the Jew and Gentile podcast.
I always look forward to doing this, mainly because I have no idea what it's going to look like.
That's most of our life, right?
That's
right. What can we expect today? Well, listen, we are going to actually do one program today on Ezekiel Chapter 38 and 39. So it's going to be a great program. Hold on a minute, Steve. Here we go. Well, welcome in, everybody. Yeah, you know what? We decided after doing the 7 signs of Jesus that we would focus in on
one.
With the bonus, that's right, 7 plus 1. And so we thought today we would just do a one-off for everybody, but something that's kind of not only biblical and prophetic, but also very applicable to what's going on in the world today.
You look in the Middle East today, Israel just a couple weeks ago had a weekend skirmish.
Yep.
We call it I say that jokingly because there were over 1,000 rockets launched into Israel. And isn't it interesting that none of those rockets really hit any place? And if they were intercepted by the Iron Dome. Thank God for the Iron Dome.
Yeah, amen. And so, there's a lot of events that are happening in the Middle East, and you know what? We always like to. Media is always interesting for the way that it promotes what's going on in the Middle East. Whether you can with all of the technology that we have today and the internet, man, we get different opinions coming from all angles anymore. Everything is made available to us. But you know what, Steve, we don't like to look at things just through the lens of what the newspapers tell us or what all the media agencies do. We like to look at it through the lens of what the scriptures teach as well. That's very important, especially for the Middle East.
It is, Chris. And what we decided to do was to first, as we look at what's happening in the Middle East, where did those rockets come from? Essentially, they came from Iran. At least they were the ones that helped purchase them.
That's right.
So that the Palestinians could use that. Jihad. What it's called? It has
Palestinian Islamic Jihad.
Yeah, PIJ.
PIJ, yeah.
That's right, the PIJ. So what we did is I went to the archives, and I'm telling you this, Chris.
You went to Israel, My Glory archives.
I was going to explain. You're correct.
Sorry.
No, I'm glad you did that. What I did, our listeners could do if they want. I cannot believe. I believe it, but that's expression. It's hard for me to imagine going back to any magazine that I want to go back to. Some of the finest preachers and writers that not only Friends of Israel's had, but we've had so many guest writers through the years that you could go back to any magazine at any time if you subscribe digitally to FOI. How does a person do that, Chris?
Yeah, if you wanted to go get 40 years of Israel My Glory articles, you just got to go to israelmyglory.org and you'll see a subscribe button on there. And if you've never subscribed with Israel My Glory before, you can actually get a 1-year free subscription to our digital version, which is online, so you can read it on your phone, your smartphone, your tablets, your computers. Or you could get our regular magazine that would come in the mail to you. Now, you don't get 40 years of magazines.
Yeah, don't do it that way. I mean, do it a good way, an economical way, good stewardship way. You get it free the first year, but when you pay, you will then not just buy the current issue and future ones that you're paying for. You could go back to any issue you want. Chris, I just find it amazing to be able to go back and read Elwood McQuaid's articles, to read Rennie Shower's articles, all the Fred Hartman's articles.
To read your articles.
My articles.
That's what we're doing today.
That's what we're going to do. Yep, me as well. But so many others. And what's amazing to me, Chris, is you could go back. Well, we are going back to 2007 for this article, I believe. But you could go back to the 90s or 80s, and many of those articles are just as relevant as when they were written.
Yep.
Because, first of all, the Bible doesn't change. Second of all, man hasn't changed. And God is still on the train leading to eternal life and leading to the consummation of all things. And so you could read articles that are just as relevant because the authors believe the same things and are getting from the same source, the Word of God.
And that's why today we want to talk about Gog and Magog, Ezekiel chapter 38 and 39, and we want to kind of give some maybe some clarity to this to Ezekiel 38 and 39, the prophet, as he's writing about a war that's going on with Israel. Bring some clarity because there's a lot of opinions, Steve. And,
a lot of opinions.
And I want to be the first to say that I don't know if I believe that what we're going to say is a good way of looking at it, but there are a lot of opinions, and you know what? Other opinions are okay too. There's even great scholars in our theological camp, Steve, disagree with one another on this. And so it's okay, but we want to share with you what we think, what we see happening not only in Ezekiel, but how that's playing out in the world around us today as well.
Well, Chris, we're going to act like rabbis during this session, and we're going to say, well, some say this, and some say, in fact, in the article, that's what I say. I wrote this article that we're going to go over, and some say this, and some say that. But let me tell you what I think.
Exactly.
And you listen to the rabbis, or go to a deli today. Go to a deli, sit down in a chair next to a table next to a whole bunch of people, and the number one thing, did you hear what so-and-so said?
Yep.
Let me tell you. And did you hear about what happened? So that's just the nature of the kind of the culture, at least I grew up with. And so when we come up with a situation in the text which tells us what's going to happen, we only have the information given to us, and it's always going to go through your brain and spirit, and based on what you know, what you learned in the past, and we're going to give us our best shot.
We'll give it our best shot. But before we get into it, everybody, I just want to say the Jew and Gentile podcast is sponsored by FOI Equip. And Steve, we had a great time with Paula going through her class, the
Love
Jewish
that food.
cuisine.
The challah. And it's not challah.
I know it's
challah.
not. I know it's not challah. And challah has chametz in it.
It does have chametz, not hummus.
Not hummus, chametz. Okay.
Tell them why we're saying
well,
that, Chris.
because during the National Prophecy Conference, as I'm speaking to hundreds of people, I had the Feast of Unleavened Bread, and I thought I was saying chametz, or at least a chametz. And
I had two witnesses, so that's biblical.
Well, they kept throwing the Jewish guy was throwing me under the bus, saying, "You're saying it wrong. You're saying hummus. I know what hummus is."
Hey, look, the tongue does not always. It's not always kind to you. I can speak from experience.
Well, especially when you speak for a living, anything can come out sometimes.
Anything can come out.
Well, let me just say really quick, we've got some great classes coming up, a great fall lineup. First of all, September 15th, be sure to join us for a chat with the president.
The big macher.
The big macher, the president himself, Dr. Jim Showers, will be with us. He's going to be talking about the history that was surrounding the founding of the Friends of Israel. Very important topic, especially if you love Friends of Israel. We have so many great, not only listeners of the podcast, Steve, but dedicated people who love what the Friends of Israel does to minister to Jewish people all around the world, to show the loving kindness of the Lord to them. This is a great way. If you love Friends of Israel, you're going to want to hear Jim Showers. He's going to give a great message on that.
I really look forward to that, Chris.
The other is, have you ever wondered what's going on in between the Bible? There's just this, if you ever end in Malachi, there's this one tiny flat page that says New Testament, and then boom, you're in Matthew. That one little page, we can jump from Malachi to Matthew and act like it's one day went by.
400 years.
400 years. Just think about it for a moment. America hasn't even been around for 400 years. Think about how much has changed in the world in just 100 years' time. Well, imagine all that can happen between Malachi and Matthew and 400 years. Well, yours truly, I'm going to be teaching on intertestamental history. That's just a big way of saying between the testaments. What was going on between Malachi and Matthew that led to the coming of Jesus, that all of the events that were driving the Jewish people at that time. There was a lot of political, emotional things going on. There was a lot of religious aspects to what's going on. If you leave Malachi, Steve, there's no Pharisees, there's no Sadducees, there's no Herod, there's none of that. But then all of a sudden you turn the page and boom, there's a Pharisee. Where'd they come from?
In the fullness of time, God sent forth his son. Chris, what you're going to be talking about is really important because you're right, Malachi, the Older Testament is done, but you couldn't turn the next page. God has in his timetable a perfect time for the second person in the Godhead to incarnate, and it wasn't after the book of Malachi.
Nope.
Other things had to happen. So I look forward to that class too. I think I slept through my class on intertestamental.
Oh,
stuff.
no.
Yeah, but the guy, all he did was he just read stuff from a book, and you'd sit there for 50 minutes listening to him read it. In fact, one time he left. He left, so he had his son who was in the class
read
his stuff. It was so I need to hear it in a fresh perspective.
I want to get to that status in life where you can get a job just reading a book and get paid to do that. That sounds like fun.
Well, it's not if you're taking the class.
But
so
for him, he's collecting a paycheck and just reading a book. All right, but no, I will not just read a book, I promise. But what I will show, look, in 400 years, we're talking about 3 empires would rise and fall during that time. So there's a lot of things going on. And one of the other things, Steve, that I love about intertestamental history, and then we'll give you information on how you can sign up, is that it was a time where the Jewish people had to think about how they would identify themselves and mark themselves. Would they succumb to the world and the culture of the world, or would they say, no, we refuse to be like the world, we are God's chosen people, and with zeal would they stand up and mark themselves as the Jewish people fighting against the culture? I think there's a lot of application between what happened to the Jewish people in the intertestamental period and us today as Christians following the Lord. What do we think about the culture? How do we embrace the culture? How do we understand our faith in the Lord Jesus and the culture that's constantly trying to penetrate our relationship with him and how we walk with him? So there's a lot of great correlations there as well.
100%. It was nip and tuck there in the intertestamental period between, there are a lot of Jewish people who just assimilated.
Yep.
And the battle was on. And fast forward to my time period in the 50s and 60s, that's exactly what I used to go against, what I would perceive as liberal or reform Jewish people, because I still remember, I've told this story, sitting in the synagogue on Yom Kippur as my friends would come in. Did you brush your teeth? Yeah, I did. You didn't fast. You're done. You're done. Did you drink any water? Yeah, I drank water. You're done. You're done.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah. I was like a little Pharisee. The whole idea of, are you going to, if we are the chosen people, if we are the people of God, then we need to do what he says. That's when I was a little kid, that's what I said, until I realized I'm falling short all the time. I never do what he says, but that's the idea. And so I think it's significant today in our culture. You read about all kinds of Christians struggling with different kinds of things that the culture is promoting.
Yep.
And it's becoming difficult. It's difficult to be a Christian parent trying to raise your Christian kids. It's difficult in the system that we have.
Your workplace, the things they make you do in some of these big companies when it comes to, gender identification and all these. I mean, the horror stories I hear from people, it's very interesting.
So it'd be nice that we won't have to feel guilty in this period as we listen to you and watch you teach and see what the Jewish people did or didn't do, and see how God set up the ultimate arrival of his son. Nations were beginning to maneuver during this period of time, Chris, and I think you'll be able to tie it in, and I hope our listeners and students, as we take the Equip course, will be able to tie in our circumstances with the way it was back then.
That's all going to start October 6th, 7:30 p.m. Eastern Time. You can register for the class. It's a 3-week series, so it'll be October 6th, the 13th, and the 20th. You can do that by going to FOI Equip
400 years in 3 weeks. That's better than my class that I took. I had 15 weeks.
Well, I'm just going to read. No, I promise I won't read. Come, October 6th, FOIEquip.org. All right, Steve, Ezekiel 38 and 39. You know what I always love about these two chapters is that God is the one orchestrating these events. I think Ezekiel is very what's the word I'm looking for? He's trying to convey that God is the one orchestrating these nations that are going to be coming to Israel for battle, because
he's strategic.
He's very strategic. In verse 4 of chapter 38, it says, "I will turn you around," speaking to these nations, and he says, "I will turn you around, the Lord, put hooks in your jaws and bring you out with your whole army, your horses, your horsemen fully armed, and a great horde with large and small shields, all of them brandishing their swords." And he goes on and he talks and he says, "I'm going to drag you down to Israel." And I always appreciate what Ezekiel's doing here as the Lord speaking through Ezekiel. But when it says, "I'm going to put hooks in your mouth," the Assyrians, when they came and attacked Israel and the 10 tribes, that's the way that they would carry people out and drag them out as they were trying to assimilate them into other cultures, and they were exiling them in 722 BC. The Assyrians would put hooks in the mouths of their people and drag them out. And so God is saying, in the same way you did this horrible thing to my people, I'm going to put a hook in your jaw and drag you back into the land where ultimately you're going to find your demise. But this is the point is that it's not like this is just some battle that comes up out of nowhere. God is sovereignly acting in this time. He's the one orchestrating all of these nations that we're about to talk about in this war of Gog and Magog.
Well, the article that we went to is it's titled "War. What's it good for?" Yeah. Now that's my generation. It's a Vietnam song. War. What is it good for? Yep. Absolutely nothing. And when I preach on this passage, especially if I see a lot of gray heads like mine, I say, some of you might not have heard this thing. Let's see if any of you have. I say, "War, what is it good for?" And I put my hand to my ear, and you hear them, absolutely nothing. And I don't think in most churches the pastor likes to
that's right.
hear that, but it is funny. And so I asked that question because the whole idea of war, the Bible is filled with stories of war. And this Vietnam song just tells us, you know what? There's nothing good about war. Well, I challenge that statement. I don't like war. I don't want war. My father fought in World War II. I fought in 0 wars. I did not volunteer. I was not drafted. I would have gone if I was drafted, but in my day, it was a lottery system. And I was fortunate, in my opinion, to get a high number. So I didn't go. But wars have happened. My dad served in World War II. He and his people his age, the greatest generation, stopped one of the worst atrocities to ever occur, and it would have been worse. 6 million Jewish people died, were brutally killed during 1.2 million kids. Who stopped it? It was the Allies who stopped it. That war was horrible war, but it was good because it prevented Hitler from taking over the world.
The world, yeah.
And in the article I write, in 1948, Israel had a war of independence. They didn't want war. In fact, they went through the legal ways to become a country. They were affirmed by the United Nations. They had a vote. That vote was passed. Harry Truman, President of the United States, recognized Israel. It was a very difficult time politically because most of the Western world thought that if Israel declares itself a country, it's going to be a war and it's going to be over shortly. It's going to make America or any other country that recognizes Israel look bad. They shouldn't do it, but Harry Truman did. And there was an attack, 5 countries. We know that the victory came to Israel. In 1956, Israel forced Egypt to reopen the Suez Canal. They closed it.
Yeah.
France wanted it open, but they didn't want to do it. Israel did it. And that was a very important skirmish, non-declared war, but it saved a whole shipping system of what goods to get through. And then you have the 67 war, uniting Jerusalem, the Yom Kippur War, all these wars. We don't like them, but Israel becomes established. Israel is a country. And as a result of the victories that Israel won, Chris, let's forget the theological side for now. We believe the best thing of all is Jesus Christ, and God promised Israel that they'd be a country. Let's just look, with those victory of wars, do you know how many people have been saved medically through medicine that Israel as a country was then, that's people produced?
Probably millions and millions.
Medicine, tech. It's possible if Israel was defeated, we wouldn't have cell phones. The computers wouldn't run that well if we had them at all. And on it goes.
I'm even thinking World War I and World War II. I mean, there wouldn't be in Israel. Even the thought of it with all the other nations, it was World War I that led to the Balfour Declaration that gave way to the British Parliament and the Queen or the King himself saying, we're going to give this land over to the Jewish people at some point. That was a big deal when it comes to it.
Huge deal. You should have helped me write this article. I didn't include that.
World War II was another monumentous. After the Holocaust, there was sympathy for the Jewish people at that time, which ultimately gave way to. That wasn't the only reason, but definitely played a factor at the United Nations for seeing Israel created.
If there weren't 6 million Jewish deaths, they would have never passed that bill in the United Nations. No question about it. So the question is, war, what's it good for? So we know that it's possible there could be a good war in that sense. I would make the argument that this war, and we're going to talk about, we have some questions about it. I'll make the argument that this indeed is a purposeful war. It's a war that you already indicated from verse 4. God is the one that, it's his timing. He's going to bring the countries down. And what happens in this war is going to be extremely significant. So we have to ask a few questions. First question is, who attacks? Chris?
This is an attack on Israel.
It's an attack on Israel. And they have some weird names.
They have very weird names. And it's important to remember, too, this is a regional, it's kind of isolated to what's happening around Israel. Because when we begin to isolate who these countries are, you're going to see that they're countries that are surrounding Israel. So it's not, this isn't a global war that's taking place. This is more of a regional war that's going on. But the first enemy that's mentioned is Gog of the land of Magog. It says, the word of the Lord came to me, son of man, set your face. So he's saying, Ezekiel, set your face against Gog of the land of Magog, the chief prince or rush of Meshech and Tubal, prophesy against him and say, this is what the Lord says. And that's when he says, you, Gog, chief prince of Meshech and Tubal, I will turn you around and put hooks in your jaws, and I'm going to drag you down. Along with, it says this, along with Persia, Cush, Put will be with them, with all the shields of the helmets, also with Gomer with all of its troops, Beth Togarmah from the far north with all its troops, the many nations with you. So we're seeing that this is being instigated by one particular nation, but there are other nations in alliance as well.
And if you look at the article, and you're going to have that in the link so that they can people can read it if they choose to do so. We're talking about what we believe is Russia with a whole bunch of nations, and I call them the stands. You could call them what you want. There's Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan. There's all kinds of stands. And the area you're talking about regionally, Chris, is Russia and primarily Turkey. And these nations, along with Persia, which is Iran, Put, which is Libya, Gomer, which is also Turkey, and Togarmah, which is Turkey. All that area, Chris, as you just said, is regional. Wait a minute. They're in our news feeds almost every day.
Yep.
Israel's in our news feeds. Iran is in. We go back to the administration of President Obama and trying to appease Iran, trying to prevent them from becoming nuclear, and the hours invested by politicians, ambassadors, to try to keep peace on the earth with all these different things going on. So Iran has been in the news. Turkey has been in the news. There used to be a time, Chris, when you and I went to Israel and the average Israeli went to Turkey on vacation.
Yeah. Oh, that's the number one vacation spot.
Turkey. But Turkey then turns against Israel, and now Turkey is not against Israel. And then we know ultimately at this battle, Turkey, that landmass with these talking about these nations, is going to be part of this configuration of nations that God puts hooks into their jaws to drive them down. The question then is, and we get it all the time, and here's where we have to be rabbinical, Chris. When is the attack?
Well, there's a lot of different opinions on this.
Oh, yes. This is where, stroke your beard. Yours is longer than mine.
There we go.
And
we just heard this morning during chapel that how long your beard is. What did Peter Cologne say?
Peter Cologne said that your
the length of your beard.
The length of your beard tells you how scholarly, which is perfect. I graduated in the top 10% of my class, top 10% of the lower third of my class. I have a short beard.
Okay.
You have a long beard.
But you have a lot more
you are a scholar.
Wisdom than I do. And I am not a scholar at all. I just have a long beard, Steve.
Either way, we can safely say amongst evangelicals who believe that this is a future battle, which we believe, they're still not sure when this battle takes place. We know that some Christians believe that it took place in the past. We know that there's some Christians who believe this is symbolic, believe it or not, that this is just talking about a war, and many Jewish rabbis believe this is just we learn from it that good always triumphs over evil. And that's the way they talk about it. But 2 whole chapters of specific names, geography, what happens, how it happens. There's a lot of details to me that kind of eliminates that. But as to when it might happen,
I even read one, Steve. This one's out of the box. I was reading about Gog and Magog from a scholarly perspective, from way out of the box, not from the Christian tradition at all or anything. Or even maybe even Jewish, but that the Ezekiel 38 and 39 was added later on. It has really nothing. Ezekiel did not write this. It was added later because of the way that the Hebrew words were borrowed from other places, and so there's when you begin to look, he was arguing when you look at the text, it was added later. We don't believe that at all, but just another opinion that people are looking.
How did he interpret it? Did he tell you how he interpreted it?
He didn't. It wasn't so much about interpretation, but about how it was something that was inserted
Textual
later.
Textual criticism he was going.
That's
for.
exactly what it was. Yeah.
All right. Well, but in the text, first of all, we know nothing like this has ever historically happened that's recorded anywhere.
Right.
That these countries, with the kind of seven months of 7 months to bury the dead, 7 years of all this equipment, it's never happened before. That's number one. And then there's 2 phrases in verses 8 and verse 16 of chapter 38. 2 phrases, one in the latter years and the other in the latter days, that in the text tells us this is a future event. This is an end times event. So you say, well, wait a minute. It's the late times for Ezekiel. But exactly what you just said, it's later times, and it's never happened before. That means it's got to happen.
That's right.
Which means it hasn't happened. So up till now, it's got to happen. That means it's got to be in the future.
Which is a very typical way for the way that we understand prophecy, that it hasn't been fulfilled yet. We could say the same things about Jesus' prophecies on the Mount of Olives. We can look at them and say, oh, those were fulfilled by the Romans when they came in and destroyed Jerusalem. But we go, but wait a minute. There seems to be a lot of cosmic activity happening as well, as the sun, moon, and stars are changing and things like that. Those events didn't take place yet, so we can't give it. We can't say, oh, that happened in 70. That did not happen in 70 AD. So there are a lot of things that are still to take place, and we're looking at the events that are happening in the text and saying, well, that didn't happen yet.
True. Very true. Now, Chris, we know that when this happens, it's got to happen when Israel feels secure. Can you read that text?
Let me see where is that, Steve? What passage?
Let me see.
Here it is, Ezekiel 38:11. Where it says, this is what the sovereign Lord says. On that day, thoughts will come into your mind, and you will devise an evil scheme in You will say, I will invade a land of unwalled villages. I will attack a peaceful and unsuspecting people, all of them living without walls and without gates and without bars.
So, Israel today is not defenseless. Just a couple weeks ago, we just saw the precision in their missiles. You and I have given news on our podcast about driverless tanks, which even have the ability to launch drones, who can go into urban environment.
Yeah, we're talking about the kids that play video games or flying drones.
They have so much technology and military prowess that this is a period of time when Israel has dropped all defense systems. That's never happened since the reestablishment of the nation of Israel. And so we know that for some reason, there's going to be this reason for the government of Israel to say, you know what, we don't need these weapons anymore. Mm-hmm. Chris, in Christian theology, at least in dispensational Christian theology, when does that period of time happen? We believe there's a specific time when that happens.
Well, when the promise that God made to Abraham is fulfilled, when the Lord Jesus returns.
Well, before that, that's true. But what happens according to Daniel? There's 70 weeks that are determined, and we've only gone through 69 weeks, and that's 70.
Oh, we're talking about the tribulation period.
That's right. The tribulation period is a time when the Antichrist makes a covenant or reestablish a previous covenant cut, and they believe that the Antichrist will guarantee freedom. That's when we believe, many of us believe, that this war will take place. Mm-hmm. Now, there's some who say it's in the middle part of the 7-year period. In my article, I take the position that it's toward the beginning of it, because the Antichrist is going to take credit for the victory, because the victory is not won by Israel. It's not won by any outside person that you can see. We know that the victory comes through the soldiers go crazy and they fight each other. Brimstone falls down from the sky. Earthquakes happen. The whole army is defeated. And we believe the Antichrist will then say, that's me. Mm-hmm. You didn't see me do it. I have that kind of power. I signed that document, and I have that power. And so we believe that. Again, it's under debate, but that's what we believe. So we believe that this covenant, the attackers come from the north. We believe it takes place early in the 70th week of Daniel. But the question, Chris, why do they attack? That's the question. What is the reason for the attack? Antichrist signs this document. Isn't there worldwide peace? Evidently not. What happened?
Well, it says in verse 12, I will plunder and loot and turn my hand against the resettled ruins and the people gathered from the nations, rich in livestock and goods, living at the center of the land. Sheba and Dedan and the merchants of Tarshish and all our villages will say to you, have you come to plunder? Have you gathered your hordes to loot, to carry off silver and gold, to take away livestock and goods, and to seize much plunder? So it looks like the nations are coming to want to plunder Israel, to take all that it's benefited the world for, essentially, to occupy the land in many ways as well.
100%. And in the article, we talk about what that booty, what that plunder might be. Chris, at the time I wrote about this, I wrote about a man who I had the privilege of meeting in Israel, John Brown, who was the founder of Zion Oil and Gas.
Yeah, we met with him before.
Yeah, we did. We had a chance to meet him because he believed literally that there was oil and gas to be found. And indeed, there has been. I don't know if Zion Oil and Gas gets the credit, but we know I wrote an article about shale that's in Israel. Israel has enough gas, natural gas, to export. So all we're saying is, Israel used to be. Golda Meir made the joke that Moses made a wrong turn.
Yep.
The oil was. No, Moses didn't make a wrong turn. He went exactly where God wanted him to be. And even though they didn't know, they were sitting and are sitting on abundance of resources one of them being gas, oil, that kind of thing. But there's other things as well. There's a natural warm water port in Haifa that Russia would love to have, and some of these nations up north would love to have.
You right too that Israel. You were talking about the Dead Sea contains billions of dollars worth of chemicals and fertilizers for cosmetics and whatnot. So
it could be that, but Chris, it might not be any of that.
Mm-hmm.
It wouldn't surprise me if the reason that God put hooks in the jaws of these nations is for one reason. It's been going on for years. It's been since the first Jewish people came, and that is hatred.
Yeah.
Just good old anti-Semitism.
You know, it prompts me to go to Psalm 83, Steve.
Oh,
which
perfect place.
Yeah, which I think that, you know, a lot of people try to allocate this to a specific battle in Psalm 83. I just think it's the eternal hatred of the Jewish people because God has a plan for them. And
why don't you read it?
Yeah, it just says, "Oh God," Psalm 83, a psalm of Asaph, "Oh God, do not remain silent. Do not turn a deaf ear. Do not stand aloof, O God. See how your enemies growl, how your foes rear their heads. With cunning they conspire against your people." And this is like coming right out of Ezekiel 38. They plot against those you cherish. Come, they say, let us destroy them as a nation so that Israel's name is remembered no more. With one mind they plot together to form an alliance against you. The tents of Edom and of the Ishmaelites, of Moab and the Hagrites, the Biblos, the Ammon, the Amalek, Philistia, with the people of Tyre. Even Assyria has joined them to reinforce Lot's descendants. And it goes on and on. But the idea is that the Asaph is calling on God to protect his people. He says, make them like tumbleweed, my God, like chaff before the wind, as fire consumes the forest or a flame sets the mountains ablaze. I'll go down to verse 17. May they ever be ashamed and dismayed. May they perish in disgrace. Let them know that you, whose name is the Lord, that you alone are the most high over all the earth. You could almost say this is one of the reasons why we, as friends of Israel, exist too. You know, we don't want to be the people who are associated with cursing the Jewish people. We want to be people associated with blessing the Jewish people, because those who curse the Jewish people are found ashamed and dismayed and will perish in disgrace. That goes back to Genesis chapter 12, verses 1 through 3. May those who bless you will be blessed; those who curse you will be cursed. But Psalm 83 is a perfect picture of anti-Semitism, the hatred of Jewish people, all throughout history.
And in verse 10, Chris, you're right. To back up what you're saying, it says, "On that day it shall come to pass that thoughts will arise in your mind, and you will make an evil plan."
Yep.
It's possible. Certainly, the motivation is to take a spoil, but they're motivated by hatred, and they come down. So, Chris, that's the bad news. Israel's supposed to be at peace. They are trusted. We believe in the Antichrist, and that signature that they put on that covenant. Now, these nations attack because they hate Israel. They want to get what they have. They're going to eliminate them. They have no regard for any defense because they know there won't be one. Yet what happens? The question I ask in the article, what are the results? What happens?
I'll just say, I'll be like your professor.
That's right. Why don't you read what I say?
I will. The results are astounding. A vast horde of troops will descend southward like a swarming cloud, confident that the battle will be one-sided. For them, Israel's defeat is a foregone conclusion. But these armies are overcome by unexpected events that destroy them. Chapter 39, verses 7 through 2. First, earthquakes erupt in Israel. Chapter 38, verse 19. Attacking soldiers become confused and kill each other. Verse 21. Third, a deluge of flooding rain, hailstones, fire, and brimstone. As a result, the invaders will fall on the mountains of Israel. These unsuspecting armies will be so completely great writing, Steve. These unsuspecting armies will be so completely devastated that they will take 7 months to bury the dead, who will become food for every type of predatory bird and beast of the field. In addition, their accumulated weapons abandoned on battlefield will supply fuel and burn for 7 years.
So the end is God prevails.
That's right.
These are God promised that the Jewish people would be an eternal people, that he would never forsake them, that he chose them for a purpose, and even in their disobedience, even when he had to chastise them, there are still Jewish people to this day, and the reason they're Jewish people is not because of how great we are, but how great God is. And so the results of this battle are God gets the victory. And so when we think, Chris, of what's happening in Iran and in Turkey and in the whole Middle East, where you got Syria, and this is on the border of Israel, you got Syria and the troubles there, and Russia dealing with Syria, and Turkey dealing with Syria. You've got Jordan on another side. You've got Egypt below you, and you've got Lebanon above. You've got Gaza, which Hamas has. You've got what we call Judea Samaria, which is the West Bank. And you've got all these things and nations surrounding Israel. Israel's still here. We read about it. So the question comes, I know you've gotten it, Chris. I've gotten it too. But how do you answer? Somebody comes up and says to you, hey, Chris, Iran has nuclear weapons. They're going to destroy Israel. We have to stop them. What's going to happen?
Mm-hmm. You know, it's hard to say what will happen, but we know God is in control. And that's the whole point of Ezekiel chapter 38 and 39, that all the events as we read about Iran building a nuclear weapon, the way they threaten Israel and they hate Israel. They hate Zionists like us who love Israel. They make alliances, which we'll talk about in a little bit, even today. But all of it is, as you can see, as God is moving, it's God who is the one orchestrating these events in order to accomplish a task. And, that's what I wanted to read really quick in Ezekiel 38 and 39, verse 21. The reason why God does this too, Steve, in verse 21, it says, I will display my glory among the nations, and all the nations will see the punishment that I inflict and the hand I lay on them. From that day forward, the people of Israel will know that I am the Lord their God, and the nations will know that the people of Israel went into exile for their sin because they were unfaithful to me. So I hid my face from them and handed them over to their enemies, and they all fell by the sword. I dealt with them according to their uncleanliness and their offenses, and I hid my face from them. Therefore, this is what the sovereign Lord says: I will now restore the fortunes of Jacob and will have compassion on the people of Israel, and I will be zealous for my holy name. Why does God do all this? It sounds so intense, but God does it for two reasons, and you see these reasons all throughout Ezekiel. It's number one, to restore Israel, and it's number two, to show the nations who God is. A lot like what happened back in Egypt. When the Israelites leave Egypt, there's no doubt that God is greater. Yahweh, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, is greater than all of the gods of Egypt. They mean nothing anymore. Bupkis. Now, the same thing is happening. Even though Israel was cast out and then brought back in again, God is going to show the world, even in the future, that these are his chosen people and that he will uphold his holy reputation as he's dragging them in, and they think they've come up with a great plan to destroy Israel and to utilize all of the resources that they have, that God will show them, nope, this is my land, these are my people, and my glory will show to the nations so that they will know that I am the one true God.
I really appreciate you reading those things from the Word. As we think in terms of God's glory, God being the one who's victorious, if it does take place when we believe it takes place, the Antichrist is going to take credit, and there's going to be a division. There's going to be people in that period who are going to actually, I believe, get saved because of the invisible victory won by the invisible God, and they're going to say, wait a minute, this This is extraordinary. They're going to be saved. And then there's others who are going to buy in whatever the news feeds say, whatever this person's name, he's taking the credit. Look, they signed it with me. They're safe. Everything's great. You can count on me. And there's going to be people who buy into it. It's the way it is right now, Chris. But the clock then will be ticking. Definitely ticking.
Can we talk about, too, because let's look at what's going on in the world today, especially with Israel, because we live in very unique times. You know, we're talking about the fact that Israel has peace now with the United Arab Emirates and with Oman and with Morocco, and they're, you know, in talks with Saudi Arabia. And
unbelievable.
It's like, oh, yeah, and you're looking and you're going, well, this sounds counterintuitive to what we read about in Ezekiel chapter 38 and 39. But at the same time, Steve, there are other events that are taking place, and I think this will be a good time for us to kind of transition smoothly this time, not a hard break, but transition smoothly into the news, because there are events that, as Israel and the Abraham Accords, as Israel's making more friends than ever in the Middle East, they're also the enemies, these alliances that we're seeing in Ezekiel 38 and 39 are getting closer as well as enemies of Israel.
It's kind of scary. I know you're going to read the news item that just happened, or not just happened a while ago.
I think you have it there. Yep.
I have it. Why don't I give it to you?
Yep.
And it is amazing that the pages of the scripture are almost per word on the pages of our news feeds.
Yeah, this comes from July 20th, so it's not that old, but it's July 20th, 2022.
To us, it's old because every second with social media, something that happened yesterday is old.
I know it's already changed or something of that nature, but this is July 20th, 2022. Iran, Russia, and Turkey meeting in Iran aim to reshape region. Russia is at war in Ukraine, and Turkey is demanding a new invasion of Syria. Meanwhile, Iran wants the U.S. to leave Syria and use it to threaten Israel. So you're seeing that Iran, which is Persia,
correct,
Russia, which is Gog,
yep,
of Magog, or
Rush,
and then Turkey, I believe you could say is Beth Togarmah, or all those areas
stands, yep,
are meeting in Iran to reshape the region. So these are all, in many ways, we definitely know Iran is an enemy of Israel. We know that. Russia always, I don't think that they are
they're not bosom buddies.
They're not, no, but at the same time, there have been relations, strong relations in the past. And we talked about Turkey earlier, but Turkey's been going through a transition in its structure as well. Turkey was normally on the edge of the Middle East there, more bordering Europe, and it functioned more as a secular state, as a Muslim country, more secular. But President Erdogan has definitely converted it more into a religious Muslim.
He's like a chameleon. He likes Israel, then he doesn't like Israel. He likes Israel, then he doesn't, and he is attracted to NATO as part of NATO, but he flirts with Russia. He's a interesting bird.
He is an interesting one, but the point is that there is an alliance that, as we're seeing, it's interesting because in one way, Ezekiel says Israel's at peace. There's a lot of freedom they feel, and I'm going to tell you something. I bet Israel is letting it's even now. I know that they maintain their military. It's a strong military, but you know, we have ambassadors of the UAE and Bahrain in Tel Aviv. You know, there's alliances, there's financial, there's trading going on, there's security. You know, they trade security information. They're working with Saudi Arabia. It's a new Middle East today, and I think Israel feels maybe a little more comfortable in the Middle East than they did a few years ago. But that still doesn't neglect the fact that Iran, Russia, and Turkey are working together, which is something that comes right out of Ezekiel chapter 38.
And as we just said, look, we don't know the timing. The timing is the thing that's really hard to know. And everything revolves around it. So you could even make the argument, look, there is a sense of peace right now. Russia is forming an attack, some would argue, could happen before the rapture of the church. And in fact, if you read the series, the Left Behind series, that's exactly when the authors had placed that attack.
Yeah, they do it before the tribulation.
They do it before the tribulation, and they're brothers and sisters. They're Christians. It's just you have to put it somewhere, especially if you're writing a story. And we have to put it somewhere if we're trying to interpret it, but we're not sure about it.
You know, it's also worth repeating, too. You had mentioned this already, but Israel just had the skirmish, an operation, I forget, it's not Protective Edge, Breaking Dawn, they called it, where they went in and rooted out the Palestinian Islamic Jihad, who is a proxy funded by Iran. So Iran, you might not say Iran is down in Israel, but they have their proxies. Hezbollah on the northern border of Israel in Lebanon.
Thousands of rockets. Thousands.
Yeah.
We're talking, and they're all Iranian rockets.
They're Iranian-funded rockets. So they are promoting war with Israel. They're very anti-Zionist, anti-Semitic. And so Russia and Turkey don't, if you know, when you're making an alliance with Iran, you're ultimately approving what they do as well. They're not. I've never heard Turkey or Russia condemn Iran's actions in Lebanon or Gaza. So they're definitely showing more of an alliance with Iran than they ever would with Israel. But there's an alliance that's taking place here, and it's all about Syria, which is interesting too, Steve, because Syria borders Israel.
There's been trouble. You and I have been on the border of Israel, northern Israel, during a time when they were having their civil war, and you could actually hear the bombs go off. It's kind of scary.
So, Steve, war, what is it good for? What are your closing thoughts here?
What is it good for? Ultimately, all this war and the war of Armageddon will lead to the greatest gift of all, and that is the return of the Lord Jesus Christ, coming in victory. We know that you read the text in Ezekiel, which says the glory of the Lord will be seen. At Armageddon, he's coming, Revelation chapter 19, with fire in his eyes. He's coming, his feet will stand on the Mount of Olives. He's not coming to New Jersey here in our podcast room. He's not going to Rome.
He's welcome.
He's not going to Rome or New York. No, he's going to Israel. And he's coming in glory and power, and there will be real shalom, real peace. So war, what's it good for? I can understand. It's not good, but ultimately it will lead to the victor, the Lord Jesus Christ.
Amazing. Well, it's been fun to actually connect. Instead of separating the news, they've blended together.
It's been great.
And you can get both of these articles on our show notes. Steve's article, the great article he wrote all the way back in 2007. It reads like today, Steve. 2007, that was, what's that, 15 years ago. So 15 years ago, Steve wrote that. And then this article from Jerusalem Post you can get to. I hope that you go to our show notes. But, Steve.
All right.
Yiddish word of the day.
We got the Yiddish word of the day. You and I were talking. You actually came up with it, which I appreciate. And the Yiddish word is?
Gonif.
Gonif. There's a Yiddish expression used amongst, in our own circle. When somebody rips you off, they'll say the Gonifs, they suck you dry.
The moment I said Gonif, Steve laughed and he said, they'll suck you dry.
That's right.
What is that? Gonif, well, I'll tell you what I got off the internet. It's Gonif is someone known to be shady, untrustworthy, a bamboozler, or a trickster.
That's right. They suck you dry. That's an economic statement when you encounter a Gonif. But we're using the word Gonif because of the situation that continues. We think of the war in Ukraine. We think of Putin. We think of Edgerton. We think of Iran. We put them all in one big bucket.
The Gonif pot.
Bucket.
That's right.
That's right. They're Gonifs.
That's right.
And they do. They suck the air out. They suck the air out of us militarily, economically, time-wise, spending all this time doing horrible things. We classify them as Gonifs.
That's Gonif. And you know who else? It's not in that document, but who has had meetings with all of these people is China as well. That's another big
there are
one.
More Gonifs.
That we don't even want to get into that. But anyway, hey, listen, this has been a great episode. Thank you so much for being a part of the Jew and Gentile podcast. Hey, listen, you know who's not a Gonif? You're not a Gonif. Thank you so much for listening. You're a mensch. Thank you so much for being a part of the Jew and Gentile podcast. I want to encourage you to go to foiequip.org. Why are you wasting your time? Get there right now. On your phone, on your tablet, on your computer. Sign up for our upcoming classes. You can sign up for all the fall classes. Steve, they're free.
Such a deal.
We're not Gonifs at all. We're giving this stuff away for free.
That's correct.
Well, thanks so much for being with us. We'll see you next week.